Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of amazing individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted and privileged to welcome a very senior and well known HR leader from London, United Kingdom, Shereen Daniels. Shereen, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Shereen is the founder and managing director of HR Rewired, which is a niche advisory firm which partners with companies ready to take the right steps to advance racial equity in the workplace. Shereen is the chair of the African Diaspora for Economic Inclusion Foundation. She's an advocate for anti-racism, and she's the winner of the HR Lost Influential Thinker in 2020. So, Shereen, let's start talking about HR Rewire. Tell me about the work you do.
So, in essence, I help organizations get their proverbial together when it comes to dismantling systemic racism in
Mm-hmm.
their workplaces. So, we support from boards right across to partnering and supporting HR teams, running listening forums, data and insights. And we just want organizations to be better,
Mm-hmm.
to create anti-racist, equitable and kind cultures that work for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But we start with Black professionals, Black colleagues, because as we know, since 2020, things have not improved as much as some of us may have thought.
Mm-hmm. And what was the motivation to start this venture?
So I already had the consultancy. So it was already a HR consultancy, and I was doing a lot of team dynamics and leadership work, which is what I love to do. But after the murder of George Floyd, I stopped all of my consultancy work and basically said, you know what, I'm going to do one job. I'm going to record a video a day and see how
Mm-hmm.
far I get. 5 videos became 10, became 50, became 100. So I recorded 100 videos every single day, and then had my story featured in Forbes, became one of LinkedIn's top voices.
Mm-hmm.
And so as part of that journey, I just had brands all over the world reaching out and asking for help.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you get to kind of like fourth or the fifth request, I was like, okay, maybe I'll just revisit my HR consultancy, but make it specialize in this. And so we've been specializing in anti-racism ever since.
Amazing, amazing. So, Shireen, what are some of the racial equity or inequity challenges being faced in the world?
In the world is a really good question. So, in essence, I always context this by saying people need to understand that
Mm,
many of us live within a racialized society. And what that means is whiteness, and therefore white people, are placed at the very top.
mm,
And then depending on your ethnicity and or the color of your skin, you
mm,
go right down to Black people being at the bottom, and specifically Black women being on the
mm,
bottom.
mm,
And so what we have realized is that the way organizations are run, they are optimized
mm,
for consistent favorable outcomes for some and consistent unfavorable outcomes for others.
mm,
So things like lack of global majority individuals in senior leadership positions.
mm,
You can go to the African continent and you can have an array of Black colleagues who are professional, who have the qualifications,
mm,
and yet international organizations still perceive that having white leadership from Canada, from the US, from the UK
mm.
is preferential than local leadership.
Well
So there's
said.
this inherent superiority that is connected to
Mm,
ethnicity. And then when you start to understand the impact of colonialism and imperialism, and you start to realize just how that has had an impact
mm,
globally in very different spheres, whether you're in India, in Australia, Africa, Canada, South America, or the UK, or even parts of Europe.
mm,
So it's so insidious, and that's why I use the term systemic racism, because the patterns are repeated globally.
mm. Well said. And when I was reading about you, you use a proprietary methodology to support organizations on the matter of racism. Uh, would you be able to share with me this methodology and maybe give me an example?
Yes, of course. So, one of the most common questions I'm asked is, we want to do something as a leadership team, as an organization, but we have no idea where to start.
Mhm,
We're not used to talking about racism. We don't know how to talk about it. We're worried about saying or doing the wrong thing. But increasingly, we are also worried about not doing anything because now we feel like the world is looking. So one of the proprietary models that we have is the 4-factor race model. Very simply, RACE. So, nobody can ever say, like,
Correct.
I can forget what it's I can forget what it's
Absolutely.
called. And so the R stands for recognize the problem. And so one of the things that is massively important is organizations take the time to understand what racism is and what it isn't, because we all have a perception and we feel like it's only, maybe, using the N word to a Black person and racism is so much more than that. So if you want to really make a difference, you first have to be willing to talk about it. And secondly, you have to spend the time to understand it and understand it in the context of your culture, your teams, your ecosystem. So think about your supply chain, think about how you liaise with local partners and businesses. But most importantly, think about the relationship that you have with racism. So what's your personal views as a leader, as an individual? So that's the R. The A stands for analyze the impact. So now you have a bit more of an understanding about what racism is and what it isn't, and you've got to grips with language and key terms, and you've thought about how you want to show up in this place. Analyze the impact is basically looking at data. How does systemic racism show up in your organization? So you're looking at different data points for your employees, for your customers, community members, and service users. And what you're trying to get to is root cause analysis to understand why some of those problems occur. It's not enough to start and finish with racism. You've got to go deeper. And so when you go deeper, you end up having problem statements, which means you are more likely to put in interventions that work. So get some data, which will tell you what's happening. And then from that data, you can get insights, which tells you why it's happened. So that's the most important thing. The third piece is C. So we've got RAC now, and that's commit to action. Very straightforward. What are you going to do? Now that you've looked at the data, you've got some insights, you've got some problem statements, you've highlighted the priorities. Now is the time to commit to action. What do your teams need? What do your leaders need to be able to deliver to this? And you're always making sure that you're measuring your impact according to the people most impacted by racism, not making your white colleagues feel most comfortable about the subject. They're two very different things. So that commitment to action is really important. And then lastly, empower for change is how do you unlock your organization's ability to have everybody be part of the solution? So it's not just a leadership thing, it's not just HR, it's not just Black colleagues or other global majority colleagues. This is about how do you give everybody the tools, the confidence, and the support to be able to change their behaviors, be supported to build positive habits, but also to be active allies, to also know when to intervene, and also just to help them, give them a role. I always say the purpose of that is everybody's got a job, different jobs for different people, but everybody's got a job to dismantle racism.
How well said. R for recognize, A for analyzing impact, C for commit to action, and E for empower for change. Fantastic, RACE. So, Shereen, based on your experience in the work that you're doing, what goes into evolving a culture to become more anti-racist, equitable, and kind?
Firstly, you've got to be comfortable with prioritizing the colleagues most impacted. And I know that seems like such a basic thing, Ashutosh, but you'd be surprised how many organizations feel uncomfortable about prioritizing people who often aren't the majority. So I'm thinking about where I am in the UK, Black people and brown people, global majority people, we are not the majority.
Correct.
And so their argument is, how are we going to get a return on investment on spending time, energy, money, and resources for an employee group that's actually very small? And what they don't understand is that is part of reinforcing racial hierarchy, because what you're saying is, because they don't look like you, you therefore will not put in the structures, the policies, or the interventions to make things more equitable, just because you as the majority won't directly benefit. So you have to be comfortable with that. You have to get board alignment. You have to look at data. you have to understand, like, how far do your HR teams and your line managers understand the issue, and are they capable, and do they have the skill set, the tools and the knowledge to be able to lead this change? Or are you expecting all your black and brown colleagues to do all the heavy lifting? You know, how does this fit with your vision, your values, your strategic objectives? You know, when you're doing your disclosures to the city or to, you know, to your different shareholders and stakeholders, what are you saying when people ask you, so what are you doing to address the issue? And then the last point that I would make, there's so many things, but the last point I would make, and it's really important that people understand this, is everyone gets really excited about representation. So they feel like the way to solve racism in a corporate sense is just put one more black person, one more Asian person, one more, you know, whoever on the board or in management positions, and that magically solves everything. There is no correlation between representation and the presence or lack thereof of racism. One causes the other, but if you focus on the output, it is never going to solve the root cause of why there wasn't representation in the first place. You know, and I say this even when I talk to majority black boards when I'm in Africa, and I'm like, look, we've got to talk about decolonizing. We've got to talk about understanding how does racism show up. Just because, you know, you're a majority black country or you're a majority Asian company or whatever, it doesn't mean that you don't have an issue with systemic racism, specifically as it impacts on black colleagues in the workplace.
How amazing. The other thing that is now talked about a lot is DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And yet, when I speak to a lot of people, they say that DEI education should start in schools. At what stage should this be brought into the curriculum? I'd love to get your perspective.
My honest view is, where we could all make a substantial start is at least to tell a more balanced and accurate reflection of history and what actually happened.
Correct.
Right. So particularly for us in the UK, understanding the role of the British Empire, as you know, the royal family and everybody else went into different countries, understanding how we colonized, you know, so how we went to different countries and basically took the land and parceled it up like it was our own when it was never ours in the first place, and the impact that has had on present day. So even that, you know, a lot of people talk about Black history, you know, and recognizing the achievements of Black people, of global majority people across the world. That is so powerful, because so often our history is taught through the lens of whiteness, you know, and I know more about Henry VIII and his 12 wives than I ever did, you know, about my African heritage or my Caribbean heritage. You know, my parents are from the Caribbean. So I think even just decolonizing our education system and allowing students and children to see themselves and see people of their heritage reflected in that history does so much for self-esteem, does so much for recognizing, appreciating difference and diversity in all its forms. And it means that there's less work to do by the time they get into the workplace, because habits have been developed. Correct. Stereotypes, assumptions, all of these prejudice, all of these things have already baked in because society hasn't changed. So by the time you get them to the workplace, you have to work harder to undo that, you know? So that's just my little 2 pence worth.
No, very well said. And, you know, you're so right about what education is, especially with relation to history. There's a big debate going on in India right now on why do I need to know all the governor generals who have been, you know, ruling India for so many years? Why don't I know something other than that? Yes. Well said. So my next question, Shereen, to you is, how do we remove biases in society and businesses?
The simple question is, we can't.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, you know, bias, whether conscious or unconscious, is just inherent as part of us as human beings. It's how we're wired to make decisions very quickly and short circuit almost the thinking process, so we can do things quicker and we can simplify things, simplify tasks, simplify information. So it becomes less about us as individuals eradicating bias and us recognizing that it's always going to be there. So if you know it's always going to be there, where do you put your time and energy? You put it on, you ensure that there is an infrastructure, there are systems, there are ways you make decisions, there are checks and balances to mitigate the impact of that bias, because you know it's always going to be there, you know? And I think one of the things that diversity, equity, and inclusion as a profession. I don't class myself as part of that. Anti-racism sits way over there. Nobody's interested in anti-racism, so I sit over here. But one of the things that I think the industry has done a very poor job of is we focused on the wrong part of the equation.
Correct.
So we've put all our energy, because it's easier to do unconscious bias training and all of that, all of that jazz, rather than actually question the culture, the leadership behaviors, the systems, the policies, the processes, the way things are done. Everyone glosses over that because they feel like just having people attend a workshop or a training course is enough, and so we fooled people into thinking that bias can be eradicated, and it can't. Even with the best will in the world, I have it, you have it, and that's fine, providing everything around us has therefore gone through a lens of how can we de-bias performance decisions, pay decisions, who gets promoted, all of those things. So, Shereen isn't just operating from a place of bias over here, or this person, that's normal business. That should be normal business practices.
Well said, well said. And yet a question that often comes up is, where does the accountability lie to make a change?
Well, I have two schools of thought on this.
Okay.
So if you ask Shereen Daniels, the individual, so me thinking about, the mum of two children, my purpose, which is around Black liberation, I actually say that the accountability lies with us. I personally think as global majority people, all of us with melanin in our skin, we've been too accepting of racism. We've been too accepting of the impacts of colonialism and imperialism. And we have forgot that we can empower ourselves. This is not about job titles. This is about recognizing that we have a sovereign right to exist. We have a sovereign right to basic human rights. This isn't about being anti-white or anti-whatever or anti. This is about being pro-human rights, pro our sovereign power to exist. So I think this, if we can just almost decolonize our own minds from this and worry less about how it's perceived by white people or even by those in power, this is not just about skin color. And we start to think about what is better for us as a collective people, thinking about us being global citizens. I think, every empire that fell because it wasn't right for the citizens came because the people power. People came together and said, we're not accepting it anymore.
Correct.
And I think so, and that's why I never point the finger and look at other people, because I'm saying I'm looking at myself, and we should all look at ourselves and say, how are we going to be part of the solution? What do we need to do differently? Because we do have power, we just don't exercise it.
Well said, well said. My next question to you is on your guiding values of inform, respect, and inspire. Talk to me about these values.
So, like, everyone has values, don't they? As part of, how they operate as an individual, as part of how they operate as a business. But for us, bearing in mind the sensitivity of the subject matter that we specialize in, the inform piece is to say, listen, what we are really good at is contextualizing the issue of racism, of systemic racism, right? So we help you understand how it shows up, where it's come from, but more importantly, how it is a global challenge with local consequences. So systemic racism in Brazil is slightly different to what you might, or in South America is slightly different to what you might see in the US or Canada. In India, you have, challenges with colorism and caste systems, which are also compounded, as you know more than I do, right? You go to Australia, you look at First Nations, Indigenous Aborigines, you look at how the Commonwealth still has taken their so all of these different things are important. And so we inform. So when businesses are expanding or operating in multinational territories all over the world, our point is ignorance is not an excuse to perpetuate harm. So that's really important. So that's where the inform piece comes in. And then the respect piece is we respect the seriousness of the issue. So we are not here to give brownie points for doing the bare minimum. We are also not here to dilute it for the comfort of white leadership teams, which this is a common problem in the UK. So everyone is kind of tiptoeing around because they don't want to upset or offend. So we are always tactful, but we are direct. we are very straight and there's no misunderstanding, because the issue of racism has been going on for over 400 or 500 years, and the way we've been tackling it today hasn't worked. You know, going softly doesn't work. So that's that. And then inspire is, you know, I hope as an individual and through the work that we do, that people look and think, oh my goodness, like if Shereen can do this, you know, and she's speaking truth to power and she's doing it in her way. You know, I'm talking to you with a hoodie on, I've got, you know, my hair to one side, I've got glasses on, you know, all of these things, that I don't look like the stereotypical person that has the profile that I have, that has runs in my own company, all of these things. So I want people to look and feel inspired to be their authentic selves, without the labels, without how society has conditioned you to fit in this box, but also use your authenticity as a way to connect, as a way to bring people closer to some of these issues. And so that's the inspire piece. Inspire more people, because it's going to take more of us. It takes a village. You know, it's going to take a village. You know, a whole planet to go and to do this work. So that's what we hope.
Very well said. Shereen, I've got time for 2 more questions.
Perfect.
The next question is, you know, about the young people who are now moving into leadership roles in the world, the millennials and the Gen Zs. And they have come into our world with a very, very fresh and amazing perspective. I'd love to get your thoughts on how racism or DEI is being understood and handled by the younger people.
I think what I would say by the younger people is, and I would always couch this in terms of advice that I would give them, is take the time to understand the nuances of the issue, because so often we are informed about certain things by what we see on social media, or the mainstream media. And the mainstream media and social media has a habit of making things into very binary boxes. So, you know, racism is purely about white people being racist to black people. And, you know, so they ignore the impacts of colonialism. They don't understand that you can be in a majority black or brown country and there still be issues of racism. It just manifests itself very differently. So I would say, look at the shading, look at the gray of the issue. Don't just jump, because, you know, anti-racism is absolutely what we should be going for, but you will perpetuate more harm if you feel that, you know, without sense checking that you've got an understanding. So I think that's really important for them. But equally, to the other point is, they are super challenging, and I think that's amazing. And I would say keep challenging. Like, we need that challenge. You know, leaders in businesses need the challenge, because fundamentally they need you as young people to be able to go and deliver and go to perform and go and come up with amazing creative ideas. And you've got to feel like you're working in safe cultures that take care of you and take care of you regardless of who you are, where you come from, who you love, how you look, your ethnicity. So you have to be custodians of that culture and not wait for somebody else to do that. So, like, keep challenging, keep using your voice, keep asking questions, because it's needed.
Very interesting. And my last question, Shereen, is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation. What would you say are 3 life lessons you would like our viewers and listeners to take back after listening to our conversation?
So number 1 is, just to context this, Ashutosh, I'm a very spiritual person. So I genuinely believe we are all connected. So when you start off from this understanding of connectedness, you realize that what harms one community or one individual harms us all. So there is an elevated sense of responsibility that I feel we should all have in taking care of one another and taking care of the environment and taking care of our planet, and thinking about how can we ensure that we're acting in ways that is not perpetuating harm, that we're not making business decisions that are making things worse for people in a different country just because we can't see them, you know. So that's the interconnectedness of us all is a life lesson. The second lesson is the most recent lesson I've learned, which is a lot of us get into work that what I would say pushes boundaries and is changing the way that people see certain things. And a lot of us come to this work from a place of deep crisis. You know, so I came into this space from a place of deep crisis, and so we don't often take the time to heal from the traumas that got us here. So prioritize healing, prioritize taking time to look after yourself. It's not selfish, because you cannot heal the world until you have first healed yourself. And I think that's an important lesson. And then the third thing is ask for help. I'm rubbish at it, because I was just thinking it's just me trying to fix the whole world by myself. And so, you know, you take on that pressure and it can lead to burnout. It can lead to you falling out of love with what you love to do. So if people offer help, take it. You know, take the time and just think to yourself, even just listening to me, like, if I could have somebody help me with 3 things, what would that be? So you're always ready to meet somebody in the lift, in the supermarket, on a train, you know, in the airport, and somebody says, oh my God, I really like, you know, what you're saying. How can I be of service? How can I help you? Always have an answer. I'm learning that.
Well said. Well said. Shereen, on that note, thank you so much for speaking to me. Thank you for talking to me at such length about HR Rewired and about all the work that you're doing on racial equity and you know, all the challenges that you're faced with, and what an amazing job you seem to be doing on at least communicating the need to start thinking beyond colonization. I think we face very, very similar challenges in my country as well. Thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck for everything that you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.